Welcome back to Behind Closed Files, where we delve into the most chilling and baffling cases. Terror in Tokyo. The rise and fall of Shoko Asahara and Aum Shinrikyo. The story of the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack begins with the rise of Shoko Asahara, a man who would later lead one of the most notorious cults in Japan's history. Born as Chizuo Matsumoto in 1955 to a poor family in Kumamoto Prefecture, Asahara was partially blind from birth, which influenced much of his early life. As a child, he was enrolled in a school for the blind, where he exhibited aggressive and controlling behavior, bullying other students. However, Asahara's ambition and charismatic nature set him apart from his peers. In the late 1970s, after failing to gain admission to medical school, Asahara turned to alternative medicine, operating a pharmacy specializing in herbal remedies and acupuncture. His growing interest in spirituality led him to study various religious philosophies, including Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and even esoteric forms of Christianity. Over time, these eclectic influences shaped the foundation of what would later become Aum Shinrikyo. In 1984, Asahara officially founded Aum Shinrikyo, initially presenting it as a spiritual organization dedicated to helping its followers achieve enlightenment. The name Aum refers to a sacred sound in Hinduism and Buddhism, symbolizing the universe and ultimate reality. Shinrikyo translates to teaching of truth. At its inception, Aum Shinrikyo attracted individuals who sought a deeper spiritual connection, combining religious practices such as meditation, yoga, and rigorous physical discipline. However, as the organization grew, so did Asahara's ambitions. He began positioning himself as a messianic figure, claiming that he had attained enlightenment and possessed extraordinary powers. Asahara's teachings became more apocalyptic, predicting a series of catastrophic events that would result in a global war. He warned that only his followers would survive this impending disaster, as they would be the chosen ones to rebuild the world after its destruction. Aum Shinrikyo's appeal was multifaceted. On one hand, Asahara's apocalyptic vision resonated with those who felt disillusioned by modern society, particularly during Japan's economic boom in the 1980s. The cult's teachings offered an escape from materialism and societal pressures, drawing in well-educated professionals, including scientists, engineers, and academics. These individuals were instrumental in helping the cult grow its influence and infrastructure. By the late 1980s, the group had amassed thousands of followers and had expanded internationally, establishing branches in countries like Russia and the United States. Asahara's ability to combine religion with modern technologies and science allowed him to tap into a diverse demographic. Followers were required to donate significant portions of their wealth to the cult, which helped fund its activities, including the purchase of sophisticated equipment for the group's increasingly dangerous experiments. As Aum Shinrikyo's influence grew, so did Asahara's obsession with the apocalyptic scenario he had envisioned. He began to openly preach about the end of the world, claiming that humanity would be annihilated in a nuclear war, which would be triggered by the United States. To survive this inevitable doomsday, Asahara insisted that his followers must prepare for battle against the enemies of Aum, which he identified as both the Japanese government and rival religious groups. During this period, the cult began to transform from a spiritual organization into a militarized group, stockpiling weapons and experimenting with biological and chemical agents. Under Asahara's guidance, the group developed the capability to produce deadly substances, including the nerve agent Sarin. Asahara believed that the destruction of non-believers would accelerate the apocalypse and bring about a new world where he would reign as the supreme leader. The shift to violence was gradual but decisive. Aum Shinrikyo had already been involved in various illegal activities, including extortion, kidnapping, and even murder. However, by the early 1990s, Asahara and his inner circle had begun to focus on preparing for large-scale acts of terror that they believed would initiate the apocalypse. This led to the horrific events that would unfold in Tokyo in 1995. As Aum Shinrikyo expanded in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Shoko Asahara's apocalyptic vision took a dangerous and radical turn. What had begun as a spiritual movement aimed at achieving enlightenment soon transformed into a group willing to use violence to achieve its leader's end-time prophecies. This period saw the cult's transition from a relatively benign religious group into an organization with a militaristic structure, equipped with advanced weaponry and chemical agents. Although Aum Shinrikyo presented itself as a spiritual organization, signs of its darker side began emerging in the late 1980s. Asahara's paranoia about government conspiracies, rival religious groups, and his perceived enemies grew. So did the cult's readiness to use violence to protect itself and expand its influence. Followers who attempted to leave the group were reportedly subjected to threats, kidnapping, or even forced disappearances. One of the earliest known violent acts linked to the cult occurred in 1989, when Tsutsumi Sakamoto, a lawyer investigating Aum Shinrikyo, was brutally murdered along with his wife and infant son. Sakamoto had been preparing to file a lawsuit against the group on behalf of its former members, which prompted Asahara to order his assassination. This marked the beginning of a series of violent acts that were committed in secrecy as Aum Shinrikyo began to see itself at war with external forces. As Aum Shinrikyo's belief shifted toward embracing violence, the cult began actively preparing for conflict. Drawing from the expertise of its highly educated members, particularly those with scientific and engineering backgrounds, the group started developing weapons, both conventional and unconventional. One of the key areas of focus was chemical and biological warfare. In the early 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo set up secret laboratories to produce deadly chemicals, including sarin, a nerve agent classified as a weapon of mass destruction. Sarin is a colorless, odorless liquid that disrupts the nervous system, leading to death if inhaled in sufficient quantities. The cult also experimented with botulinum toxin and anthrax, though their attempts to use these agents for large-scale attacks were largely unsuccessful. Additionally, the cult stockpiled firearms, and some members underwent military-style training. Asahara believed that Aum Shinrikyo would need to defend itself against government forces in an inevitable showdown that would trigger the apocalypse. This militarization of the cult's activities escalated the threat it posed to both Japan and the international community. Before the Tokyo subway attack, Aum Shinrikyo had already attempted to use sarin on several occasions. In 1994, members of the cult released sarin gas in the city of Matsumoto in Nagano Prefecture, targeting judges who were presiding over a lawsuit that could have led to the loss of the cult's assets. The attack killed 8 people and injured over 500, though Aum Shinrikyo was not immediately linked to the incident. Despite the failure of authorities to connect the dots, Aum Shinrikyo was not deterred. Instead, the group grew bolder, emboldened by its perceived invulnerability and the secrecy it had maintained. The cult began planning its most notorious attack, one that would shock Japan and the world, an act of terrorism designed to hasten the end times and bring Asahara's apocalyptic prophecies closer to fruition. As Aum Shinrikyo's operations became increasingly sinister, the Japanese public remained largely unaware of the scale of the threat they faced. The cult's ultimate goal was now clear: to instigate chaos and destruction, triggering the global apocalypse that Asahara had long prophesied. All of this would culminate in the attack that unfolded in Tokyo on March 20, 1995. On the morning of March 20, 1995, Japan experienced an act of domestic terrorism unlike anything in its history. Members of Aum Shinrikyo, acting under the orders of their leader Shoko Asahara, carried out a coordinated attack on the Tokyo subway system using sarin gas, a deadly chemical nerve agent. This horrific event left 13 people dead, severely injured over 1,000, and affected thousands more in the days and years that followed. Aum Shinrikyo's motivation for the attack stemmed from Shoko Asahara's belief that Japan's government, particularly law enforcement, was closing in on the cult's illegal activities. Asahara believed that a massive, disruptive attack would either delay or prevent the authorities from raiding Aum Shinrikyo's headquarters. Furthermore, the attack was seen as a way to trigger the chaos necessary to bring about the apocalyptic prophecy Asahara had been preaching. The plan was meticulously crafted by the cult's inner circle. On the day of the attack, 5 teams of Aum Shinrikyo members boarded separate subway trains heading toward central Tokyo during the busy morning rush hour. Their target was the Kasumigaseki Station, which is home to several important government buildings, including the National Police Agency. The attack was designed to cause maximum casualties and disrupt the government's ability to function. Each attacker carried plastic bags filled with liquid sarin wrapped in newspapers. The attackers were armed with umbrellas that had sharpened tips, which they used to puncture the bags before leaving the trains. Once released, the sarin vaporized, creating an invisible cloud of lethal gas that quickly spread through the subway cars and into the stations. The release of sarin gas caused immediate and horrifying symptoms in the victims. Sarin inhibits the body's ability to regulate nerve impulses, leading to paralysis, seizures, and eventually death from respiratory failure in high doses. Many passengers began experiencing symptoms such as nausea, difficulty breathing, blurred vision, and convulsions. Those who came into contact with higher concentrations of the gas collapsed on the trains or platforms. Chaos ensued as panicked passengers tried to escape the gas, and emergency services were overwhelmed with reports of people collapsing in the subways. The nature of the chemical attack was not immediately apparent, which delayed an effective response. Some subway workers and first responders, unaware of the nature of the attack, were exposed to the gas as they tried to help victims, further increasing the casualty count. The attack killed 13 people outright, but the scale of the injuries was immense. More than 1,000 individuals were left with severe injuries, many of them with long-term damage to their respiratory and nervous systems. An estimated 5,000 others were affected to varying degrees, with symptoms ranging from temporary eye irritation to more serious neurological impairments. The psychological impact of the attack was also profound. The Japanese public, who had long viewed their country as a place of safety and order, were shaken by the realization that such a large-scale act of terror could take place in their midst. The attack highlighted vulnerabilities in the public transport system and raised fears of future chemical attacks, both domestically and internationally. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Japanese authorities launched an extensive investigation to find those responsible. Early suspicions focused on Aum Shinrikyo due to the cult's history of violent acts, but it took some time to gather enough evidence to make arrests. A few days after the attack, a raid on Aum Shinrikyo's compound in Kamikushiki village, near Mount Fuji, revealed stockpiles of chemical weapons, manufacturing labs, and plans for further attacks. The raid on Aum Shinrikyo's facilities revealed the vast resources the cult had at its disposal. It became clear that the Tokyo subway attack was just one of many potential large-scale plots the group had planned. Chemical weapons, explosives, and even biological agents like anthrax were found, along with evidence linking the cult directly to the sarin attack. Shoko Asahara, the cult's leader, went into hiding but was eventually captured by authorities. The Tokyo subway sarin gas attack not only shocked Japan, but also had lasting repercussions on both domestic and international efforts to combat terrorism. The aftermath of the attack saw intense investigations, the capture and trial of Shoko Asahara and other Aum Shinrikyo leaders, as well as a societal reckoning with the dangers posed by cults and domestic terrorism. This final section looks at the immediate and long-term consequences of the attack, the legal outcomes for Aum Shinrikyo, and its lingering legacy. Following the raid on Aum Shinrikyo's facilities and the discovery of their weapons stockpiles, Japanese authorities launched a nationwide manhunt for Shoko Asahara and other key members of the cult. After several weeks in hiding, Asahara was found on May 16, 1995, in a concealed compartment in one of Aum Shinrikyo's buildings. His capture marked the beginning of the cult's unraveling. Other senior members of Aum Shinrikyo were arrested in the weeks and months that followed, and the cult's operations were shut down. With Asahara in custody, authorities were able to piece together the full extent of the group's activities, revealing that the Tokyo subway attack was just one part of a broader plot that included plans for more chemical and biological attacks. The trials of Shoko Asahara and other Aum Shinrikyo leaders were among the most significant legal proceedings in Japanese history. Asahara's trial began in 1996 and lasted several years, drawing massive public attention. The proceedings were marked by Asahara's refusal to cooperate. He remained largely silent and unresponsive during much of the trial, which raised questions about his mental state. However, the evidence against him and other cult members was overwhelming. Asahara was charged with multiple crimes, including the Tokyo subway sarin attack, the Matsumoto sarin attack in 1994, the murder of the lawyer Tsutsumi Sakamoto and his family, as well as other violent acts carried out by Aum Shinrikyo. In 2004, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by hanging. Several of Asahara's top lieutenants were also tried and sentenced to death for their roles in the attacks and other crimes. Over time, many members of Aum Shinrikyo who had participated in the attacks or assisted in the group's violent activities were either imprisoned or sentenced to death. The executions of Shoko Asahara and 6 of his followers were carried out on July 6, 2018, bringing some closure to the victims and their families. In the years following the attack and the dismantling of its leadership, Aum Shinrikyo underwent a transformation. The group rebranded itself as Aleph in 2000 and claimed to have renounced violence, distancing itself from Shoko Asahara's teachings. Despite this, Aleph and another splinter group known as Hikari no Wa continued to operate under close surveillance by Japanese authorities, who remained wary of their potential for extremist activities. Although membership dwindled after the Tokyo subway attack, Aum Shinrikyo still retains a small following in Japan and other countries, particularly in Russia. The group has been officially classified as a terrorist organization in Japan, the United States, and several other nations. As of 2024, Aleph remains under constant monitoring, and its activities are restricted, though concerns about underground cells or offshoots of the cult persist. The Tokyo subway attack had a profound impact on Japan's security policies and public consciousness. For a country known for its safety and low crime rates, the realization that a domestic group could carry out such a deadly act of terrorism was deeply unsettling. In response, Japan implemented stronger counterterrorism measures, increased surveillance of religious and extremist groups, and enacted stricter regulations on the use of chemical substances. The attack also had global ramifications, particularly in terms of how governments approached the threat of chemical and biological weapons. The ease with which Aum Shinrikyo had produced sarin and carried out their attack led to greater international efforts to monitor the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and prevent non-state actors from acquiring them. The event served as a chilling reminder of the potential for catastrophic attacks by radicalized groups using unconventional weapons. For the victims and their families, the psychological and emotional scars left by the Tokyo subway sarin attack remain deep. Many survivors continue to deal with long-term health issues caused by exposure to sarin, and the attack left a lasting sense of vulnerability in the public psyche. Memorials and annual remembrance ceremonies are held to honor those who lost their lives and to ensure that the tragedy is not forgotten. Over time, Japan has slowly healed from the wounds of the attack, but the legacy of Shoko Asahara and Aum Shinrikyo endures as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked radicalism, the allure of cults, and the devastating consequences of domestic terrorism.